You're not supposed to touch her, Seether.
She asked me to. That's good enough.
The Aurelian Palace Garden stretched across 3 kilometers of engineered paradise, bioluminescent trees casting soft blue light over walkways designed for a species whose royal family rarely walked them without full ceremonial escort. Corran Whitfield, contracted engineer overseeing the palace's atmospheric regulation systems, had never expected his 6-month assignment to involve carrying anyone, let alone the reigning monarch's only daughter. Princess Solenne Aurelis had been born with a neurological condition Aurelian medicine classified as threadwork paralysis, full cognitive function paired with near-complete loss of independent mobility below the shoulders, a condition that had confined her to hoverchairs and palace corridors for the entirety of her 19 years. "I want to see the crystalline gardens properly," Solenne told him one afternoon, frustration evident beneath careful composure. "Not through a viewport. Not from a chair 3 meters back from everything worth touching." Corran, halfway through recalibrating a nearby atmospheric sensor, glanced at her hoverchair's positioning restrictions, barriers designed to keep royal mobility devices safely distant from the garden's more delicate biological installations. "Your chair can't get closer without damaging the root systems," he said. "That's the actual restriction, isn't it? Not distance from people." "The chair, specifically," Solenne confirmed. "Not me." The solution arrived without extensive deliberation. Corran knelt, offered his back, and waited. "This is considerably less dignified than palace protocol typically allows," Solenne said, though her tone carried amusement rather than hesitation. "Dignity's overrated compared to actually seeing what you came here for," Corran replied, adjusting his stance as she settled against him, arms wrapping carefully around his shoulders. The walk that followed carried them through sections of Garden Solenne had genuinely never experienced firsthand. Crystalline flowers responding to proximity with soft chiming harmonics, bioluminescent moss shifting color beneath careful footsteps, entire ecosystems calibrated for closeness rather than distant observation. "I've lived beside this garden my entire life," Solenne said, quiet wonder replacing earlier frustration entirely, "and I've never actually smelled these flowers before." Guard Commander Vestrin, monitoring palace security feeds from his station, watched their progress with mounting alarm that eventually transformed into direct intervention. "You're not supposed to touch her," he warned, intercepting them near the garden's central fountain, security personnel flanking his approach. "She asked me to," Corran said, adjusting Solenne's position slightly, unbothered by the confrontation. "That's good enough for me. Protocol requires I remain in a chair I explicitly cannot use here," Solenne interrupted, voice carrying royal authority despite her unconventional position. "I'm overriding protocol. That authority remains mine, Commander, regardless of circumstance." Vestrin's objection died beneath the princess's direct command, though his expression suggested the matter would require further escalation regardless. That escalation arrived within the hour. Queen Isidora Aurelis appeared at the garden's entrance, ceremonial robes catching wind as she moved with a speed that abandoned every expectation of royal composure, guards scrambling to maintain formation behind her. "Solenne!" The Queen's voice carried across the garden with unmistakable urgency, alarm evident in every stride closing the distance between them. Corran felt Solenne tense against his back, bracing for confrontation that both of them had anticipated eventually arriving. "Mother," Solenne said, voice steady despite obvious apprehension. "I asked him to carry me. This wasn't—" "You're smiling," Isidora interrupted, stopping abruptly, her urgent stride giving way to something entirely different as she studied her daughter's expression. "I haven't seen you smile like that since before the diagnosis." The garden fell silent, guards and staff alike absorbing a moment that had shifted entirely from the confrontation everyone had braced for. "I couldn't see the crystalline gardens properly," Solenne explained. 19 years of viewing everything from 3 meters back. He offered something simpler than protocol allows. Isidora's gaze shifted to Corran, calculation replacing initial alarm. "You understood the restriction was about equipment, not proximity. Seemed obvious once I actually looked, Corran said. Nobody had looked that closely before, apparently. The Queen's composure, forged across decades of formal rule, softened into something considerably more personal. 19 years, she repeated quietly, and it took a contracted engineer 3 months into palace employment to notice what an entire medical staff overlooked. I'm not trying to overstep royal protocol, Corran said. I just wanted her to see what she came here for. Isadora studied them both for a long moment, weighing decades of careful precedent against the simple joy still visible on her daughter's face. Protocol, she said finally, clearly requires revision. Effective immediately, garden access restrictions will accommodate mobility solutions beyond standard equipment. Formally documented, formally permanent. Solenne's answering smile carried genuine astonishment. Just like that. 19 years of watching you view the world from a careful distance, Isadora said, ends the moment I understand there was always a simpler solution nobody bothered considering. That correction shouldn't require extensive deliberation. Corran adjusted Solenne's position gently as the Queen's guards finally relaxed their formation, tension dissolving into something closer to quiet celebration. Guess I'm keeping this job a while longer, Corran said. Guess you are, Solenne agreed, her arms tightening slightly around his shoulders, warmth in the gesture that extended well beyond simple gratitude. Though I suspect future garden visits might require considerably less dramatic royal intervention. Queen Isadora, watching her daughter's genuine laughter echo across gardens that had waited 19 years to be properly experienced, allowed herself a rare, unguarded smile, proof that sometimes the most significant royal decree began with nothing more complicated than someone finally asking the right question. Months later, the palace gardens became accessible to everyone who had once been kept at a distance by rules written without them in mind. Solenne still visited them often, sometimes in her hover chair, sometimes carried by Corran. But now, she always chose for herself. The palace eventually called the reform the Solenne Decree. Solenne called it something simpler. The day someone finally asked what I needed instead of deciding what I couldn't do. And that became the lesson remembered throughout the kingdom. Kindness isn't always about doing something extraordinary. Sometimes it's simply noticing the barrier everyone else has learned to ignore, and removing it. The end. Thanks for watching.